William Taylor is a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Today he is a vice president at the U.S. Peace Institute. Welcome to the program, Ambassador Taylor.
Daniel, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me here.
There have been some reports that Ukraine had started offensive operation inside Russia. Ukraine has not yet officially commented on that. From your perspective, is there a chance that a current or a future U.S. administration could support Ukraine's operations inside Russia, or just not to warn against such operations?
So what we're after, Daniel, is what we want is for Ukraine to win this war. We want Ukraine to push the Russians out of their country, out of Ukraine. That's the goal, get all the Russians out. And we've been providing the support, the weapons, the ammunition, the intelligence, some training, diplomatic support. We've been providing this kind of support to Ukraine to that end so that Ukraine can win. It's up to Ukrainian authorities, military and civilian authorities, to decide how they pursue that victory. Yes, the United States in the past has had some views about striking targets in Russia, and those views have evolved. And so the United States government has now given its approval to use Western weapons against military targets in Russian territory, certainly close to the border. They may agree, the U.S. government may agree to extend that authority to allow Ukrainian military to strike military targets inside of Russia. We recognize that Ukraine does not seek to occupy Russian territory. What Ukraine does seek to do is to push the Russians out of Ukrainian territory, and sometimes that means striking into Russian territory, Russian military targets. We don't support, and the Ukrainian government does not support trying to take Russian territory. They just want the Russian soldiers out of their country, and we support that.
Do you personally support Ukraine's right to defend itself even inside Russia?
I support the Ukrainians' victory, and I support the Ukrainians' decision-making how to achieve that victory. And I support the Ukrainians' decision to attack military targets inside Russia to achieve that victory, to make it difficult for the Russians to support their troops and their offensives inside Ukraine. And sometimes Ukrainians have to strike into Russian territory in order to prevent the Russians from succeeding in their military operations in Ukraine. But again, the goal is to get the Ukrainians, the goal that we support is to get the Russians out of Ukraine.
The New York Times earlier reported that U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin warned Ukraine against a secret covert operation inside Russia after the phone call with Russia's Defense Minister Andrei Belousov. What is your take on this piece of news, and is there a chance that Harris administration would not repeat Biden's mistakes?
I don't know about those phone calls. I, again, believe that the United States ought to support Ukrainians targeting military targets inside Russia. I think that's clear, and we've done that. I don't know about phone calls between defense ministers. We'll see what the new Harris team thinks about this. So far, the Harris and Walz team, now that we have a president and a vice president candidate, are on the record as being very supportive of Ukraine, very supportive. So they certainly support the Biden administration's support of Ukraine. You're right. They may take an even stronger position. We don't know yet. They're just getting started. We don't know who will be on their team if they were to be elected. So there's a lot to understand, a lot to figure out, a lot to learn about the new team. But what we do know is they strongly support Ukraine and oppose Russia's aggression.
From your perspective, do you personally believe that Harris' policy regarding Ukraine would be different from Biden's one?
We don't know yet. I think it will be at least as strong, but we don't know yet about Harris's new policy once she's off. If she's elected in November, we will very soon get a sense. Even before the election in November, there will be debates and there will be conversations and there will be town halls, there'll be interviews, and we'll learn more about Vice President Harris if she were to become president, if she were to win the election. Right now, what we do know is she has expressed and supports the strong support that the American people agree on, and the Congress agrees on. Bipartisan majorities of the House and the Senate have agreed to support Ukraine with $61 billion just most recently, and Vice President Harris totally supported that. So all to say, what we do know is she and her running mate will be strong supporters of Ukraine.
If you were a close advisor to Kamala Harris, what would you advise her on the new strategy on Ukraine?
I would advise her to be explicit about her goal, which is Ukrainian victory. I would advise her to remove any doubts about what the United States believes the Ukrainians could and should do with their own weapons and with Western weapons. That is, strike Russian military targets wherever they are. So to disrupt their aggression and to enable victory by Ukraine by pushing the Russians out of the country. I would advise her to continue the strong support and even accelerate the support on air defense and on long-range fires, long-range missile fires. Those activities and those weapons and that authority would go a long way to making it clear that she supports Ukraine's victory, and she should say that. She should say, I support Ukraine's victory and Russia's defeat.
Also, Forbes reported that the United States did not allow to strike inside Russia in the beginning of this summer. Ukraine had the opportunity to destroy tens of Russia's Su-34 fighter jets in the Voronezh region. However, U.S. did not allow to do that, and Russians got these conversations and decided to move such fighter jets from out of this range of ATACMS missiles. Won't it be too late for Ukraine to receive this decision? Won't it be too late to the U.S. to allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia, bearing in mind this fact that Russia has already moved its aircraft out of this ATACMS range?
It's not too late. Yes, the Russians were always going to pull their aircraft out of range, whatever range, whether it's short, medium, long range. The Russians are going to pull their aircraft back out of range so that they're not attacked. There will be opportunities coming in the future to attack Russian military targets. And I hope that the NATO allies, including the United States, will give Ukraine the authority to attack Russian military targets.
Politico reported some details about the last phone call between President Zelensky and former U.S. President Donald Trump. According to the Politico sources, Trump told Zelensky that he would seek a just peace for Ukraine, and he said that he would not help Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Do you believe in that?
Sure. No American president should support or help President Putin, and I think no American president will ever support President Putin. And I do believe that the U.S. policy under any president will be for a just and lasting peace for Ukraine, a just and lasting peace. That means the Russians out of Ukraine and paying reparations, and also holding to account those Russians who have.
And what is your take on the latest peace initiatives by former US President Donald Trump? There have been some reports about peace plans, peace proposals from some people from his inner cycle.
So there are some peace proposals coming out of people who say they are in the inner circle of President Trump, former President Trump. But we haven't heard anything specific from former President Trump. And we don't know who he will choose to be in his inner circle. We don't know who he will choose to be his Secretary of State or National Security Advisor or Secretary of Defense if he were to be elected in November. So we just don't know yet. There are a lot of proposals circulating around, some from people that have in the past been on former President Trump's team, some who probably would like to be on former President Trump's team if he were to be elected. But there's nothing official coming out of former President Trump that indicates what specifically he would do if he were elected about a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
Do you feel that it's a like kind of a competition between Trump members of Trump's team on how such Ukraine plan should look like?
I think there are several different versions of a peace plan that people around former President Trump have been thinking about. But I don't know that any of these proposals has the approval of former President Trump. Is it a competition? No, I don't think it's a competition. I think they're just ideas that different analysts and different policymakers, people who used to be in the Trump administration, different ideas on how to do what President Trump has said. President Trump has said just and lasting peace. That's his goal. He's also said something about doing it quickly. And so some of the people around former President Trump are trying to put some meat on those bones, trying to figure out what exactly that might mean and make these suggestions to Donald Trump and to see if Donald Trump will agree with them. There are a lot of different ideas out there, and he will have to decide which ones he pursues.
Is there any of those ideas which you are in favor of?
I'm in favor, as I said before, of Ukraine victory, which means Russian troops out of Ukraine. I am also in favor of respecting Ukraine's sovereignty and international borders, internationally recognized borders. I also agree with President Zelensky when he says he doesn't have to accomplish all of that in one step. It can be several steps, can take some time, and some can be done militarily. The Ukrainian military can take a lot of those steps, can push a lot of those Russians out of the country, but President Zelensky has also indicated that he'd be willing to look at other ways of getting the Russians out of Ukraine and other ways of reestablishing sovereignty, Ukrainian sovereignty, over all of the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. So he can do that over time, and he said he can do that both militarily and diplomatically. And that seems to me to make sense.
President Zelensky also suggested that Russia could be invited to the next global peace summit. Is it worth it?
So Ukraine has experience in negotiating with Russia. The Minsk process was not very successful. The Russians violated all the ceasefires that they agreed to during the Minsk process. So I think Ukrainians have learned a lot about Russian negotiating behavior. And when the Ukrainians are in a strong position to go to negotiating table, then they'll decide to do that. Ukrainians will decide when they're strong enough, when they've pushed the Russians back far enough that they can go to the negotiating table, and that the Russians, once they're pushed back, and once the Russians realize that the Ukrainians are never going to give up, that the Europeans are never going to stop supporting Ukraine, and the Americans are never going to stop supporting Ukraine until there is victory. And when there's victory, then we can also talk about NATO membership to ensure that that victory lasts, to ensure that that victory is permanent. And the way to do that is for Ukraine to be in NATO. So yes, I think the negotiations might come when the Ukrainians are ready, and when the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back towards those borders.
Let's cover also situation on the Middle East. How do you see the current risks for a total war between Iran and Israel?
It's a very risky situation right now, of course. I mean, everybody recognizes that retaliation on either side and retaliation for previous attacks could trigger a larger response from the other side, and then another response. And that's a risk. That's a problem. So that's why many nations, including the United States, are urging all sides to calm down, to back off of any threats of retaliation, and to work out an agreement that will solve the fighting, solve the problem, solve the issues in Gaza and in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority and a Palestinian state. All of those issues can go a long way toward avoiding a larger war in the Middle East.
The New York Times reported that Russia had started sending air defense systems to Iran. Also, Reuters reported that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin asked Iran to avoid civilian casualties in its response to the Israeli attack. Is Vladimir Putin trying to sit on two chairs, Israeli and Iranian?
No one knows what's in Vladimir Putin's head. No one knows what he's trying to do. We can see that he is in trouble, that Putin is in trouble by virtue of the decisions he's made, like, for example, to invade Ukraine. That was a mistake. I think he realizes that that was a mistake. He is in trouble at home. His economy is slowing down. Inflation is high. He is facing economic problems over the longer term. So he's got difficulties, and I'm sure he would like not to be in another war in the Middle East. And he would like to see that calm down as well.
Also, there have been some reports that Vladimir Putin cannot refuse to send anti-aircraft systems to Iran because he's so related to Iran. He have such deep links with Iran related to the shipment of Iranian Shahed drones. What is your take on that?
Mr. Putin has a problem. He needs all the air defense he can get. And so I imagine it's difficult for him to provide more air defense to Iran. In general, Mr. Putin faces constraints, economic constraints, military constraints, manpower constraints, political constraints, international isolation. So he's got to recognize those problems and try to get out of the problems that he's caused.
Also, I'd like to cover Russia's relations with North Korea. it seems like something has changed after this developments, news, and after signing the defense pact between Russia and North Korea. Do you feel that Russian dictator Putin has understood that he cannot longer continue deepening such strong relations with North Korea? Do you feel that he started to understand the problems he could face by strengthening such relations with Kim Jong-un?
Again, no one knows what's in Vladimir Putin's head. No one knows if he has understood the problems of close association with North Korea. No one knows if he has figured out the threat that North Korea could pose to all of its neighbors in the Far East and beyond. So I don't know what's in Vladimir Putin's head if he has figured this out. Again, what we have to do is be sure that Ukraine wins its war against Russia, that Ukraine stops Russian aggression against its territory. That has to be our focus. What Vladimir Putin understands or thinks, we can't affect, and that's not an area that we have a policy toward. What we do have a policy toward is defending and supporting our allies. And that includes Ukraine, and that includes South Korea, and includes Japan. We will continue to provide support to our allies.
And my last question for you is regarding the public support for aiding Ukraine. Is there enough level of support to continue aiding Ukraine, providing military assistance among the Americans?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every poll, every time the Americans are asked if they support Ukraine, they say yes, and like 60%, 65%. Every time they are asked if they oppose Russian invasion of Ukraine, they support it 65, 70%. So the American people have demonstrated their support. The U.S. Congress has voted overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis for support to Ukraine. I think that will continue. I think you're already seeing that kind of support reflected in the political campaigns. It's a strong support for Ukraine. I think it will continue. It's clearly in our interest. It's in the United States' interest. It's in European interests, as well as, of course, in Ukraine's interest that Ukraine be able to stop the Russians now and push them back out of their country. And Americans understand that, and I think that will mean the assistance to Ukraine will continue.
You have met with the representatives with President Zelensky administration and with representatives of the Ukrainian government. What are the future plans for such cooperation between your institute, between you and also our side, the Ukrainian government?
The United States Institute of Peace is doing some work with the Ukrainian government in a couple of different areas. One, we have supported the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky's 10-point plan, 10-point peace plan. We have done some analysis. We've done some of our experts have provided input into the support for that 10-point peace plan. The summit, the peace summit in Switzerland in June was a good success. And we intend to continue to support that effort. We've also done some work with the Ukrainian government on defense production. We are trying to find ways that we can support, for example, the Ministry of Strategic Industries and the Ministry of Defense, and in their cooperation with American defense firms. So I look at the U.S. and USIP, the Institute of Peace's cooperation with and support for Ukraine as being along several different lines and it lasting for as long as it takes.
Thank you, Ambassador Taylor, for your work for Ukraine, for your support for our country, and glory to Ukraine.
Heroam Slava.
Thank you very much.